history, is it truly what happened? Or is it merely a story told by the victors? We grow up believing that the textbooks are the truth, carved in stone, unchangeable, immutable. The year 1812, a number deeply etched into the mind of humanity like a scar of time. It was a year of blood, fire, and of white snow. It was the year of a cataclysmic clash between the two giants of the 19th century. On one side, Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte, a military genius, the Corsican monster with the ambition to swallow all of Europe. On the other, Alexander the First, Tsar of the vast Russian Empire, the man who led his people in a war for survival. That story we know by heart. The Grand Army of France, the most powerful war machine in the world, crossing the border. A brutal invasion, a great patriotic war. We are told of the scorched earth tactics, of the Moscow sky burning in the black night, painting the horizon red, of the bloody battle of Borodino, where tens of thousands fell, and finally, the tragic image of the French army retreating in disgrace, collapsing one by one amidst the freezing temperatures of the harsh Russian winter. That picture is so perfect that no one dares to doubt it. It is the foundation of national pride, the inspiration for war and peace, the subject of million-dollar paintings in prestigious museums. But what if I told you that this perfect picture might be a colossal lie? What if we, for the last 200 years, have been deceived by a sophisticated political theater? Let's try, just for a moment, to cast the textbooks aside. Let's brush off the dust of time and touch the silent witnesses of that era directly, not through the words of modern historians, but through Napoleon's own handwritten letters, through old forgotten medals, through the monuments standing tall against the blue sky. They are whispering a completely different story. In original documents, Napoleon hardly ever mentions the word Russia in the political sense we know today. Instead, the French emperor writes of a campaign into the mysterious land of Tartary. He writes of the lands of ancient Muscovy. He describes clashes with strange Asiatic hordes. It sounds like an adventure into a mythical land, not a military report against a known European power. Imagine the confusion of a historian, discovering that the protagonist of the story calls his opponent by a completely different name. This forces us to ask a forbidden question. If Napoleon believed he was marching into Tartary, then what role did the Russian Empire of Alexander I play in his eyes? An enemy, an observer, or something else entirely? Is it possible that 1812 was not a war between France and Russia? Is it possible that Napoleon and Alexander were not sworn enemies, but secret allies, and the real enemy, the one erased from maps and history books. Who were they? To find the answer, we do not need a time machine. We only need to access the archives of the Russian State Library. Let's go back to the year 1912. That was the moment the Russian Empire solemnly celebrated the centennial of the victory in the Patriotic War. The whole of Russia was boiling with patriotism. Monuments were erected everywhere. A series of artifacts and medals were released to honor the feats of their ancestors. And right here, amidst that glorious aura, we find an artifact that is impossible, an artifact that challenges every logic of official history. It is a commemorative medal. On the front side, we see the profiles of two emperors minted in relief, Alexander I and Napoleon Bonaparte. The strange thing is not their presence, it is how they are depicted. Look closely at their eyes. They are not confronting each other in a battle stance. They do not look at each other with hatred or contempt. On the contrary, they look at each other calmly, with dignity, full of respect. They appear as two peers, two partners in an important dialogue. There is not a single hint of aggressor and victim. This is a portrait of mutual respect between two great monarchs. That image alone is confusing enough. But flip to the reverse side of the medal, and confusion turns into a genuine shock. The inscription engraved on it completely overturns our understanding. It reads, "Strength lies in unity." Pause for a second to let that sink in. Unity? Unity with whom? With the man who burned the sacred capital of Moscow? With the man who spread death to tens of thousands of Russians? How can a symbol of unity be placed next to the portraits of two emperors whom we are told were mortal enemies? This is not just an oddity. This is a logical paradox. Imagine if after World War II, a medal was issued featuring Stalin and Hitler looking at each other affectionately with the caption, "We are strong together." That would be absurd, unthinkable. War memorials are created to reinforce the victor's version of history, not to contradict it. This medal doesn't just contradict, it screams in our faces that official history is hiding a massive truth. It implies an alliance, a common goal that united the two kings, and that is not the only case. If we open the old book, Monuments and Medals of the Combat Feats of the Russian Army, we find a whole series of similar absurdities. Medal number 7, Front Napoleon in his majestic uniform. Verse, "The Cathedral of Christ the Savior, the most sacred symbol built to thank God for saving Russia from the invaders." Why? Why engrave the temple burner on the same coin as the temple built to celebrate the victory over him? It is like putting the picture of an arsonist on a firefighter's badge of honor. Logic is completely absent here, unless we are missing a crucial piece of the puzzle. The issue goes beyond lifeless metals. It permeated the culture and mindset of 19th century Russians. Read the literature of that time. Read Pushkin, Lermontov, and the diaries of soldiers who fought on the front lines. You will discover something strange. The image of Napoleon in the eyes of contemporary Russians was not demonized at all. In those lines, you will hardly find boiling hatred or contempt for the French emperor. On the contrary, throughout the text, one can feel a hidden respect. They admired his genius. They praised his grandeur. They viewed him as a tragic figure of global scale, not a bloodthirsty barbarian. It seems the concept of the arch enemy was a propaganda product woven much later in the 20th century when people needed a simple symbol of us versus them. If poetic words can be dismissed as romantic emotions, then let's look at the steel evidence. Let's go back to 1912 at the Grand Exhibition in Moscow. The exhibition catalog, preserved to this day, reveals a shocking detail. In the display case covering the period 1813 to 1815, immediately after the war ended, lying solemnly on the shelf was the personal saber of Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte. But the most remarkable thing is not its existence. It is the story of its owner. This saber was not a trophy looted on the battlefield. It was a gift. Napoleon himself gave his personal saber to a Russian general, Count Pavel Andreevich Shuvalov. Official history explains that Shuvalov was the man who escorted Napoleon to exile on Elba, and to thank him, Napoleon gave him his weapon. Stop and think, the proudest emperor in history, a warrior who considers his sword his soul, his honor, his power. Would he give that inseparable object to his jailer? Never. You do not give a sword to the man who imprisons you. In the aristocratic and military culture of the 19th century, the act of gifting a personal weapon was the highest symbol of trust. You only gift it to an equal, a kindred spirit, a benefactor who saved your life and honor. This act completely shatters the myth of animosity. Shuvalov was not a jailer. He was an honorary escort. He was the one who ensured Napoleon's safety against the real enemies. This gift is steel-hard proof of a friendship, or at least a deep cooperation between the two sides. But if you think the sword is the only proof, you are mistaken. The biggest secret lies ahead, involving the uniforms they wore. Also in that exhibition catalog, records of military uniforms were found. The documents state clearly, Napoleon personally proposed design samples to Alexander I to give the Russian army a more dignified appearance. Even a famous Cossack uniform design was based on Napoleon's ideas. This is direct and undeniable proof. The leaders of two warring armies sitting together to discuss fashion designs for their soldiers? This contradicts the logic of war completely. Uniforms are meant to distinguish friend from foe on the battlefield, but here The French emperor is helping his enemy beautify their ranks, unless these two armies were not built to destroy each other, but were designed to stand side by side, like two pieces of a unified military machine, like different corps within the same grand army. If items in a museum can be hidden away, the monuments standing tall under the open sky cannot be denied. We walk past them every day. We admire them, but we rarely read the code carved in stone. Let's talk about symbols. The symbol of the Russian Empire is the double-headed eagle, looking both east and west. The symbol of Napoleon's empire is the single-headed eagle, inherited from Rome, head turned to the left, wings spread proudly. Two different birds, two different civilizations. So why all across Russia are the most glorious victory monuments crowned by Napoleon's eagle? Let's go to the village of Tarantino, where the Russian army established its base. On top of the monument column sits a single-headed eagle. The inscription at the base reads, "At this place, the Russian army saved Russia and Europe." Pay attention to the phrase "in Europe." If Russia was fighting Europe, led by Napoleon, why say they saved Europe? And why use the enemy's symbol to honor their own victory? There is more. Go to Kaliningrad. 2. The monument to the great Field Marshal Barclay de Tolly. His family coat of arms is a double-headed eagle, but the monument depicts a single-headed eagle. Go to Smolensk. The monument, "Russia is grateful to the heroes of 1812." On top of the cliff, a single-headed eagle spreads its wings. This cannot be a collective mistake by the sculptors. No one mistakes the enemy's national crest for their own. It is a code. The use of the Roman eagle, Napoleon's symbol, on Russian victory monuments indicates that the line between us and them in that war was not as clear as we think. Perhaps this eagle was not the symbol of the enemy, but a shared symbol, the symbol of a unified Eurasian military alliance, operating under a single flag. And if monuments are silent witnesses, then now I will give you a witness that speaks, a handwritten document that will end all doubts. We have examined metal, stone, and fabric. Those circumstantial evidences are powerful, but a skeptic could still dismiss them as coincidences. But now, we reach the final stage of the investigation, a document that cannot be denied. This is an original letter, written by the hand of Napoleon Bonaparte himself, addressed to Emperor Alexander I. It is currently stored and published by the Yeltsin Presidential Library. Its authenticity is absolute. Picture the scene. September 1812. Napoleon is in Moscow. But this is not the triumph of a victor. The ancient capital is drowning in a sea of fire. The Grand Army is trapped in a giant snare. No food. Winter is approaching. At that most dramatic moment, Napoleon takes up his pen and writes to Alexander. The man whom the whole world considers his mortal enemy from the very first line does not call Alexander an enemy. He writes, Monsieur, my brother. He writes that he started the war without any personal animosity, but then comes a sentence that with a single stroke of the pen brings the entire house of cards of official history crashing down. Napoleon writes, and I was truly ready to yield to you the honor of entering Moscow first. Read that sentence again slowly. Yield the honor of entering Moscow first. In war, capturing the enemy's capital is the pinnacle of glory. It is the symbol of absolute victory. Enemies never yield that glory to each other. They seize it with blood and iron. This statement, this concession, could only happen in one single scenario. If Napoleon and Alexander were on the same side, if they were not enemies, but allies carrying out a joint mission. In this scenario, everything makes sense. Who entered Moscow first was merely a matter of diplomatic protocol between two brothers in arms. This letter is the master key. It unlocks every secret door. Now, we understand why the medal said unity, why the sword was gifted, why they designed uniforms together, and why Napoleon's eagle stands proudly on Russian monuments. Napoleon's letter is a direct confession, but in solving this mystery, we crash into another mystery twice as large. If Alexander and Napoleon were allies, then who were they fighting? Who was the real enemy that forced both Europe and Russia to join forces? Who was the enemy that forced Moscow to execute a scorched earth defense? In his reports, Napoleon calls that enemy Muscovy or Tartary. On ancient maps from the 17th and 18th centuries, territory east of Moscow, stretching all the way to Siberia, was always marked as Grande Tartarie, Great Tartary. Perhaps the real picture is this. The War of 1812 was not France invading Russia. It was a coordinated global campaign, a grand civil war between the New World Order, led by the Euro-Russian alliance, and the remnants of an ancient empire, Tartary. The goal of the campaign was to destroy Tartary completely and annex this land into the new political map. The burning of Moscow was not an act of vandalism by the French. It was the desperate scorched earth tactic of the Tartary faction when their capital fell to the Western coalition. The war ended. Tartary was erased. When the New World Order was established, history needed to be rewritten. A complex story about alliances and civil wars was not beneficial for nation building. People needed a simpler myth, easier to understand. And so, the myth of the Great Patriotic War was born. Napoleon was turned into an invader. Alexander became the lone hero defending the fatherland, and Tartary, the once mighty empire, was wiped from the maps and sank into eternal darkness. What remains are only fragments of the truth, confusing metals, lost eagles on the tops of monuments, and top secret letters lying silent in the archives. They are there, mocking our ignorance. Now, the choice belongs to you. You can continue to believe the simple story in the textbooks, or you can accept the fact that history is not a straight line. It is a maze filled with buried secrets. The artifacts we have examined, they are real, they exist, and they force us to think, to doubt. Do not believe anything just because it is written in a book. Search for the answers yourself, because true history is the history you discover on your own.